There's a small island in the northern Persian Gulf that most people have never heard of. It is approximately 25 kilometers long, sparsely populated, and unremarkable in almost every physical sense. But through the terminals and pipelines of Kharg Island flows approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. Kharg Island is the financial oxygen of the Islamic Republic, the revenue stream that funds its military, its proxy networks, its missile programs, and its capacity to wage the war it is currently fighting. For 11 days, American and Israeli forces have struck targets across Iran with extraordinary precision and intensity. They have not touched Kharg Island. That decision, deliberate, calculated, and now openly questioned inside Washington, may be about to change. The island that has survived the opening phase of this war untouched is now at the center of a strategic debate that could determine the entire trajectory of the conflict. When asked directly by NBC News whether the United States intended to seize Iranian oil, President Donald Trump declined to answer with his customary bluntness. Instead, he offered something more revealing. He said people had talked about it. In the language of this administration, that is not a deflection. It is a signal. Trump then referenced Venezuela, where American forces captured President Nicolas Maduro in January and subsequently moved to secure and tap that country's oil reserves. Trump claimed in his State of the Union address that the United States had already obtained more than 80 million barrels of Venezuelan crude. The parallel was not accidental. It was a template being held up to the light. To understand what the seizure of Kharg Island would actually mean, one must understand what it represents within the architecture of Iranian state power. The Islamic Republic's economy has been battered by decades of sanctions, mismanagement, and the structural distortions of a theocratic system that prioritizes ideological objectives over economic efficiency. What Iran does possess, what has allowed it to sustain its military ambitions, fund Hezbollah in Lebanon, arm the Houthis in Yemen, and maintain influence across Iraq, is oil revenue. Kharg Island is where that revenue begins its journey. Tankers load there, transit the Strait of Hormuz, and carry the financial basis of Iranian regional power to buyers across the world. Remove Kharg Island from Iranian control, and you do not merely damage the Islamic Republic. You sever its economic lifeline at the source. Every proxy force it funds, every missile program it sustains, every diplomatic leverage point it holds, all of it traces back to the oil that moves through that island's terminals. Analysts examining the strategic logic of a Kharg Island seizure identify several converging motivations. The first is leverage. Whoever controls Kharg Island controls the terms of any future negotiation with whatever government emerges in Tehran after this conflict ends. The second motivation is symbolic victory. In an administration that has consistently framed this war in maximalist terms, Trump has already demanded Iran's unconditional surrender, a statement that sent the Dow Jones down more than 900 points. Seizing the economic heart of the Islamic Republic would be a defining political moment. The third motivation is the Venezuela precedent itself. The administration has demonstrated in real time that resource seizure in the context of military operations is a viable and repeatable strategy. The question is not whether the logic exists. The question is whether the military and diplomatic costs of execution can be managed. The economic context in which this decision is being debated is already deeply unstable. Brent crude oil has surged past $100 per barrel for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, approaching $120 in early trading before partial retreats. Analysts have warned publicly that oil could reach $150 per barrel by the end of March if transit through the Strait of Hormuz does not resume. The average price of gasoline across the United States has reached $3.45 per gallon, a 16% increase in a single week. The fighting in the region has effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz, causing Iraq to cut its oil production and Kuwait to begin curtailing exports, with storage facilities filling and tanker movements at a standstill. The ripple effects are spreading far beyond the conflict zone itself. Qatar's energy minister has stated plainly that rising oil prices due to this war could bring down the economies of the world. That statement was made before the prospect of a Kharg Island seizure entered public discussion. The economic stakes are compounding faster than diplomatic solutions are forming. The military pathway to Kharg Island is not straightforward. Any seizure operation would require ground troops, a commitment the administration has thus far been reluctant to make publicly. The island's proximity to the Iranian mainland means any occupying force would operate under continuous threat of counterattack. A botched or contested seizure would not merely fail as a military operation. It would destabilize the very energy markets the administration is simultaneously trying to calm. The operational risk is not simply military. It is economic, political, and diplomatic simultaneously. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Agency has recorded 13 incident reports involving vessels in and around the Strait of Hormuz in the first 10 days of the conflict alone, 10 attacks and 3 cases of suspicious activity. The waters surrounding any potential Kharg Island mission are already saturated with active threat. Thousands of flights have been canceled daily since March 1st. More than 20,000 travelers have been stranded across major Gulf hub airports. The U.S. State Department has ordered non-essential personnel out of more than a dozen countries, including Ankara, Riyadh, and Doha. The international dimensions of a Kharg Island seizure extend well beyond the Persian Gulf. For China, Iran's largest oil customer, which purchases a significant portion of its crude through tanker routes originating at Kharg, an American seizure of the island would represent a direct and immediate economic threat. Beijing has already criticized American military operations in Iran. A move against Kharg would transform that criticism into something considerably more urgent, potentially triggering a confrontation between the world's 2 largest economies over access to a single island's oil terminals. For Russia, which has positioned itself as Tehran's strategic partner throughout this conflict, an American seizure of Iranian oil infrastructure would validate every narrative about Western resource imperialism that Moscow has deployed for years. The propaganda value alone would reverberate across the global South. Within the United States itself, the political calculus is shifting. The House of Representatives has already narrowly rejected a war powers resolution that would have halted operations in Iran. The margins are thin, the public debate is intensifying, and sustained high oil prices are beginning to create Republican political vulnerabilities ahead of the midterm elections. What the Kharg Island question reveals, more than anything else, is the distance between the opening logic of this war and the strategic destination it is now approaching. The conflict began with stated objectives: dismantling Iran's nuclear program, neutralizing its missile capacity, severing its proxy networks. The seizure of Iranian oil infrastructure introduces an entirely different category of action. It transforms a military campaign into something that begins to resemble a resource war, with all the international legitimacy questions, great power tensions, and long-term occupation risks that classification implies. The island sits there in the northern Persian Gulf, its terminals quiet, its pipelines dormant, its strategic value understood by every government watching this conflict unfold. Whether American forces move toward it in the coming days will tell us something fundamental about what this war is actually for, and how far its architects are prepared to go to achieve it.